Okay, first up we have Vincent. And yeah, I think this is looking good. Um, from what I can see, I like there's kind of an edge light here on his back, which is good. Separating from the background, you might want to have something that hits him along the top there as well from behind. These appear pretty bright, and I think that makes them a little distracting because our eyes are attracted to the highest contrast points in the frame, and because this is so bright and that is dark, that's the highest contrast point. So what you want the audience to look at is the character, but our eyes will be drawn to these. So I would dim those and maybe simultaneously having some more kind of fill light to kind of make that not so black. Maybe you have a like a high decay on those lights so that they're very bright and they're very quickly dropping off. Maybe you can lower the decay on them and then um, anyways, but find a way to make them not as bright. And lots of good cast shadows all over the place. Again, yeah, this is looking good. I think here's where, if I was to pick the highest contrast point in the frame, I would say it's right here, which is good because that's the character. We're looking at the character. We're looking at their head, their eyes. You've got a nice rim here and along the hands there. So that's good. Some interesting cast shadows, and yeah, it's looking good. And yeah, this is a very nicely lit scene. I like there's like pooled areas of light, and then I would say that you'll want to find a way to fill in the shadows. I don't think they'd be quite as dark as they are. So whether you want to go as far, probably the render time would be painful, but if you wanted to do like a final gather thing, that would probably do that, or you could just fill them in with an ambient light, would be the other choice. Because you might find that adding final gather will slow down the render too much. So, um, but yeah, overall looks good. I mean, you've been very thoughtful about your light placement, and um, there's a lot of complex things going on, so you did a nice job. Next up is Cindy. So yeah, I guess this is a very cartoony look, and with a cartoony look, I would expect it to be somewhat bright and evenly lit, like it mostly is, except that I would say that you're letting your shadows fall to too much darkness. So again, with this kind of very cartoony, colorful environment, I expect things to be kind of bright and not fall to total darkness. And then if we were kind of referencing reality, we would say that there would be enough bounce light in the scene, the light reflecting off the house and the grass and the other trees and that stuff to fill in those shadows somewhat. So I think either way, either as a stylistic choice or kind of as a way light actually works choice, you want to fill in those shadows. Um, I mean, I think it's good to have cast shadows. It helps place the object there, so I'm not saying that, but I'm saying partly. So, in fact, those shadows are fine. Really, it's just the shadow side of the object. So, it may be a question of just doing a fill light, from the other direction of the main source of light to fill in those shadows. So, it could just be a much dimmer light, and make sure to turn off cast shadows on that light so no objects block it, and then you can just control how much you want to fill in the shadow on the dark side of the objects. I mean, you want some contrast because it helps sort of describe the shapes, so it's helpful in that sense that you have the bright side. But here we just follow the total darkness, and it kind of blends into the stuff behind it. So, and if you wanted to make these things pop, you could add a sort of a little rim light, just some kind of other light coming from behind to kind of highlight the edges. But not entirely necessary. But the main thing is to fill in the shadows, and I'm seeing that on all of these. And I think that you might want to do, at least for the characters, sorry about that, a little bit more. I know these are all kind of far away. We don't have any close-up ones of the characters, which would be nice to see. Um, but I'll just sort of zoom in. Um, so yeah, you've got cast shadows for the characters, which is good. And it's on the characters that you might want to do a little bit more, like maybe doing something that works as like a little bit of a rim light to kind of highlight the edge of the character. Um, you could pretend it's a bounce light off the house or something, or don't even worry about justifying it, but just put it in there. And maybe in the interior of the house, you want some kind of inside light, maybe some kind of a more kind of a tungsten color that's sort of a yellow orange color, and then you might in response to that, you could tint the outside light a little bit, just a touch blue, so you get that kind of color contrast, and it feels like there's a light and some life inside the house. So yeah, big thing, fill in the shadows. That's the kind of headline, and then yeah, you might want to add some details to the characters. But overall, it works. Next up is Brittany. And the first thing is I just want to say how pleased I am to see some reference, and I actually think this is very good reference. I'm always talking about rim lights, and it's a great example. Like you can see this rim light along his head and hair, um, kind of defining his legs here. You've got that rim, which is great. You've got some interesting kind of light detail out of focus in the background. You've got what's nice to show depth in the scene is sort of pools of different areas of light. So you go from, very bright to medium to dark, back to light to very bright to dark. It's just those kind of layers of brightness really add depth to the image, which is a good thing. So yeah, just great reference. Nice image. And so yeah, I can see you've done some of that here. So we've got some of that going on here. So we've got sort of got different areas of light, but it might be interesting to get some sort of variation in the foreground a little bit, and then some in the background. For some reason, these bleachers are falling to complete black, and I'm not really sure what's going on there. I'm guessing maybe it has to do with the material that's on them, because I would feel like there's some light hitting them. Also, when I see that these railings look bright, that makes me think that there's some light hitting those bleachers, but something sort of broken. So maybe just try a different material, even just throw like a default Lambert on the seating to see if there's an issue with the material, because I don't know why they're solid black. Um, the character is well lit. I like the spotlight because that's, I think, what you would expect here. But I think that maybe not letting this get quite so dark. I mean, actually, if we go back to this, you mean yes, there is a spotlight hitting this guy, but there's more lights up on the ice than just the spotlight. So I think yeah, just kind of filling in some of that more. Um, yeah, good, well lit. Got a couple cast shadows. I can see you're tinting the light, which is good for some colors. This is falling to darkness here, and even if you did something like, I don't know, just a few sort of lights in the back, like light sources that we could see in the background, maybe, and even like, use some depth of field to throw the background out of focus. That might be good. This is nice. We've got this like high contrast thing going on here, which is sort of outlining these forms along the edge, which is good. And again, some interesting cast shadows, so you might want to soften the shadows, but here you're getting overexposed, and you probably were overexposed too, but I guess we're just far enough away that it doesn't bother me as much. So you might want to try to avoid getting quite so overexposed. Um, and you might want to smooth the character too. He's looking kind of um, chunky. It should still work. It might slow down your animation, but if you do it, after you're done with the animation, it should work for the render. So, yeah, so, overall good. I think filling in some areas with more light, figuring out what's going on with the seating, because I'm, without opening the My file, I'm guessing it's to do with the material. And, yeah, just a little, a few more areas of lights would be good. All right, nice. Next up is Alberto. So yeah, this one I would say, well, this overexposed area, I would say it's too bright, so I would tone down that light so you don't get quite so hot on the character's back. And then it looks like you have some kind of texturing issue here. My suspicion is it hasn't really been UV mapped. So you either need to, deal with UV map or just use texture as projection and project it onto there. The texture on the chairs looks okay from what I can see. But then there's no background at all, and I wouldn't let the background fall to complete darkness. You should try to fill it in with something. This is looking too bright, and again, it looks like we have some extremely stretched UV situation going on here. So I don't know if you haven't laid out the UVs at all, or unfolded them, or what's happening there. But it's something to be dealt with. And again, just too bright, here. So tone that down a bit. And then here we have something which is it's so dark I don't even really know what's going on. So, I mean, it's okay to have some dark and some light, but you'll want to fill in the shadows so we can see what's happening. So, I like that it's getting more stylized. It looks like you're using some colored lights and looking at, highlighting the edges of some things. So I can see some good thought in there, but I just think it needs more work for us to tell, what exactly it is and what's going on in the shot. Next up is Damien. So in this you've got got this glow. I think it's supposed to be coming from this, and what I would say is that's very bright. So it's kind of maxing out here. But the other thing is that if the room is lit, then an object like that it would frankly have very little impact on the as far as lighting on the objects around it. And then the same would go here. Like, I mean, just try it in your home. Hold up a tablet close to your face, and if the room is well lit, you'll notice it very little. If the room is very dark, you'll notice it a lot, and then somewhere between. So I guess what I'm saying is with as lit as this room looks, and especially you look at some like these bright kind of lights hitting her there, I don't think this would do as much. And it's a stylistic choice, so maybe we're trying to do something stylistic, and that's okay. But I guess I'm saying tone it down here, but all the more so tone it down there. Because again, I was talking about before about like audiences' eyes being attracted to the highest point of contrast and brightness on a frame, and clearly this is where your eyes are looking, and for the most part you want us looking at your character, not at some object in the scene. So yeah, tone that way down. It's okay to give it a little bit just to have a subtle effect, but be much more subtle with it. You might want to do, maybe you have that, it's just less obvious. I guess this is a light source as well, is it? Is that kind of lighting that area? You could actually push that a little bit more because it's the only visible light source here. Yeah, and that looks okay. Again, if this is a light source, that's going to be pretty bright, but maybe you don't want it on. Maybe that would be distracting. Just leave it. Yeah, you mentioned the hallway was lighter. I mean, you could probably go further with that. It might create like a nice silhouette for the character if it was even brighter in the hallway relative to the lighting in the room. I think I see like a little bit of a cast shadow over here. Is that what that is? So I'm not sure what the light source is. But it could be like in the hallway, I'm imagining sort of like fluorescence on the top and just being this very evenly lit, diffuse light. So not really any kind of light that's going to cause cast shadows, but just sort of a bright, evenly lit area. Whereas maybe like the living chamber is more, dimmer lit. So yeah, it's working. I might go for a little more contrast. Have this like completely even background. I mean, there's a subtle cast shadow there, but I might, I guess my question is, what is the light source in this room? Is there one big overhead light? Is this lamp lighting this area? And if so, it would appear brighter. So yeah, just think about it, and maybe more than one light source, and maybe play with the tinting of the light source a little bit. Could be good. But I mean, overall, it's fine. You can see everything, so you're on the right track. I think you could just give it a little bit more sort of reality if you think about the light sources and directions. Next up is Sungjong. Okay, so This is looking pretty good. You've got some cast shadows. I like that your shadows are softened, so that's helping. I think that yeah, it's looking good. We've got some nice highlights on the eyes, which is helpful. I don't know if that's built into the texture or if it's in the light. Um, yeah, overall, I think this is working well. I mean, I guess one thing I'm noticing is that your material, and I think I talked about this back in the texturing module, is that you have, I'm guessing, some kind of fong material or some kind of material with a highlight on it, and you either need to just plain turn down the specularity or do a spec map. Where certain areas are highlighted and certain aren't. But right now, it just looks like it's sort of looking, because of the highlight, it's looking like metal rather than fur. And so either you just need to turn down the specularity quite a bit, or do a spec map where you kind of just paint little areas on the character that are highlighted. So, and if you go back to the video on the texturing, I believe I talked about that. But yeah, obviously it relates to lighting because you only see the specular highlights once it's lit. So I think that looking at these trees and the shadow side of the trees, I would say that you need a fill light there. And I still think that you should replace these trees with more of this kind of tree because they just look, I don't know, strange with the two different kinds in there. And they sort of look like placeholders to me. Especially, you look at how nicely detailed the bench is. You look at how, whoops, it's not yours. You look at this tree, which is, it's still squares for the leaves, but it's better. And then these just sort of sphere and cylinders look kind of out of place there. So the other thing to think about just for your scene is just foreground, and then maybe some kind of texture on the ground, and then kind of background. Maybe you just want to put like a hill or a wall. But again, I think I talked about all of this stuff in previous videos, so you can take a look back there too. But yeah, I mean, the lighting overall is okay. I just think actually the scene could use a little bit more attention. Okay, next up is Tommy. So here, you've got this clear sense of a light source with that light. Well, that can be good. You certainly want to soften the edge of this. I assume it's a spotlight. You can use like the penumbra to kind of soften that out. Um, but you need a fill light. So the typical thing to do would be to make this kind of a little bit more of a tungsten color, yellow orangey light, and then have kind of a directional light that represents the moonlight. That would then fill in these kind of areas that have fallen to black, for example, on the character or on the sides of some of the objects. So yeah, try like a blue directional light to fill in the shadows. And yeah, same here. I mean, it's sort of interesting how the character is silhouetted, but again, you're going to want to use a tungsten color light, that is to say, a yellow orange light for the indoors, and like a blue tinted directional light for representing the moonlight for outdoors. And right now, yeah, you've just have too much of the fame falling to darkness. It's like you can't see any detail here. And you might want to think of other light sources in the scene. Maybe there's a lantern around or some other outdoor lights, or who knows what. You come up with, be creative. But the point is that you don't want to just let your scene fall to so much darkness here because it's just hard to see. And here, I don't know why it has that kind of pink color. And maybe, I mean, I guess when I looked at this, I was assuming it's nighttime because you have um, that we can see an outdoor light and then everything. Or is this indoors? I think this is outdoors. I don't even know. It's hard to tell because I can't, you can't see the rest of the scene. So if that's the indoor light, it's just hard to tell because so much of the frame falls to darkness. Anyways, it also depends what time of day you want. So I was sort of assuming it was nighttime, but if it's morning time, you really need to brighten it up and fill in the shadows and those kinds of things as well. So I guess it's hard to know what you're going for here, but the point is, very rarely do you want stuff to fall to complete black, so you're going to want to find a way to fill in those shadows and sort of lighten up the scene a little bit.